About a month and a half ago, I started working as an Amazon warehouse team member. Now, I only spent a couple weeks at this job before I decided to quit. And there was a few big reasons why I did not want to keep working at an Amazon warehouse. Now, for those of you who might be thinking, maybe I'll do this gig, it might be all right for me, you have to think about this in terms of personal context, where you're at. After all, after my very first day at an Amazon warehouse, I had a subscriber comment on my video that Amazon warehouses are actually a cakewalk compared to some other warehouse jobs. He'd worked at a meatpacking facility in Colorado, and he seemed to think that that was much, much worse. So it's all about perspective. If you are set to work in a warehouse and you're looking for the best warehouse, an Amazon warehouse might be a great opportunity for you. It pays pretty well, about $15 per hour and more in some places. There's sign-up bonuses. There is the ability to get promoted and hired from within, kind of climb up that scale. But for me personally, I'm not really setting out to work in a warehouse long term. So here are some of the big reasons why I would avoid working at an Amazon warehouse if I were you. Reason number one is scheduling. In order to get those full-time benefits that Amazon talks about, you have to work full-time in a warehouse. We're talking like 10-hour shifts at one of these distribution centers, and this can be kind of mind-numbing work. It's a lot of moving stuff. It's a lot of lifting. It can be a ton of cardio and a decent amount of heavy lifting. 10 hours of that can be really just a massive load on your body. Now, if you're working as a sorter, I've heard that this is obviously not as much cardio, not as much lifting, but it can be equally mind-numbing. A lot of the managers do not recommend taking that 10-hour shift. So you get packaged into these shorter 4-hour shifts in a part-time schedule. And for me, scheduling was an absolute nightmare. So for starters, I don't have any guaranteed scheduling at my warehouse. There were other warehouses that did. I would highly recommend finding one of those if you can. Mine was sort of similar to working with Amazon Flex. They put all the blocks out at like 9 a.m. and you have to fight for those blocks. You have to get there faster than other Amazon warehouse employees that are working at your distribution center. And so for me, I was working the night shift. I was showing up at like 11 p.m. and supposedly getting off at 3 a.m. So my entire life was kind of, flipped on its side. I'm used to just working a normal schedule. I had to flip that for this 4-hour shift. And then if I wanted to get more shifts, I had to be back up at 9 a.m. So I had to come home and somehow, just stay awake for the next few hours to get those next shifts. And for me, that scheduling just was absolutely not worth it. Everything that I liked doing during the day, I could no longer do. As I mentioned, I was working the night schedule, so everything was thrown off about my routine, and I was now a night person. I was only working 4 days a week, so I had to massively change my sleep schedule just for this little amount of time that I was actually working and getting paid for. And that sacrifice was not worth it whatsoever for me. And this kind of leads into the next big reason why not to work at an Amazon warehouse, and that's consistency. If you can't have that set schedule, your pay is not going to be consistent. And one other massive problem popped up for me that I was really frustrated with. It was the fact that I was scheduled for a 4-hour shift, so I would drive into the warehouse, I would show up, and I would expect to get paid for 4 hours, but oftentimes we would finish moving all of the packages to their respective locations in like 2.5 hours. Now, within the first week, within training, we were told that you could always stay 4 hours if you wanted to, but nobody really ever ended up doing that because there wasn't a lot of work to do. So when we finished early after one of these shifts that finished in like 2.5 hours, you have to volunteer to go sort through packages and make sure that nothing's unorganized. You're kind of resorting stuff, and they don't really want a lot of people doing this. So as I mentioned, one of the higher level managers said that you can always get your 4-hour shift. You just have to ask for it, and you have to make sure you're doing something to keep yourself occupied. The problem is the managers are always trying to optimize. They want to get the fastest times for their team. They want to pay the least amount of money to get the most amount of work done. So they don't really want a lot of people staying late. And what this meant is that those 4-hour shifts I thought I was getting were actually like 4 2.5-hour shifts that I was fighting for. against my peers. The next major concern for me was my personal safety. Now, before I got started, there was a ton of training to cover this online, and it's really just the basic stuff, lifting with your legs, not your back, being careful, doing those things to minimize the potential to get yourself injured. The problem is when you're working in a warehouse with other people, who might be sloppy and they're moving different directions with their packages, they might cross routes with you, they might back into you. It's possible that you get injured here, and even a bigger concern for me was COVID safety. So about a week and a half into this job, I actually got an email from Amazon stating that one of the people in our warehouse had caught COVID, and basically what they said is that they were doing a full clean of the warehouse and life would continue as normal. We could show up the next day for our shift. For Amazon, there was absolutely no question that that warehouse would be kept open and that people would be continuing to come in. There was no effort to do contact tracing. It seemed pretty plausible to me that the person who was sick had come in the day before, could have contacted with other people in the warehouse, and then I could possibly get sick from them. But Amazon does not want that downtime. So personally, I felt like I was putting myself at risk. I did not want to put myself in that situation. I did not want to risk my health for 2.5 hours at $15 an hour. It just did not make sense to me in any way, shape, or form. Something that you don't always think about when you are considering a W-2 job is the expenses that come alongside of that. Now, a lot of what we talk about on this channel is the gig economy, and you're always thinking about your expenses when you're doing a gig because you are paying for the gas, the wear and tear on your vehicle that's associated with that gig. Those expenses can also be a major player when you're looking at a W-2 job like an Amazon warehouse job. And that's because the distance that you travel to that warehouse, those expenses are not covered by Amazon. So that gas money, that wear and tear on your car on the drive there is going to have to be factored into your earnings. And for me, it was a 30 to 40 minute drive, a 35-mile drive each way to work at that Amazon warehouse. So when I was doing these 4-hour shifts that ended up being 2.5-hour shifts, that's a total of about $37 in profit. I also have to look at that 60 miles or so that I was driving. Now, according to the standard deduction, that's costing me about 50 cents per mile. That adds up to be about $30 in expenses just getting there and back every single time I go into the Amazon warehouse. So when you factor those against my earnings, I'm really not making much. I'm almost working for free at Amazon. And the problem here is that oftentimes Amazon warehouses are located far away from rural neighborhoods, from places where you might rent an apartment, places that you might live. They're looking to get the best possible cost advantage for their warehouse, so they do not want to be in a busy, high rent, high expense area. They want to be far away from that area. So it's really hard to find a warehouse where you're going to have a short trip. So for most people that are looking at this job, I highly recommend taking into account for that expense, especially when you're doing these shorter part-time shifts. So with all that said, with all of these reasons why not to work at an Amazon warehouse, ultimately I did end up quitting to pursue other opportunities. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Feel free to ask me any questions down below and I'll do my best to kind of help you out if you're getting started working at an Amazon warehouse, or if you just want to look for better opportunities out there, I can potentially help set you up with one of those.